manage the border. And a lot of the individual border services officers really were very reluctant to touch paper because the public health agency had said you can catch COVID from touching paper. So the necessity to get paperless processes in place was really important.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Mr. Seaback, welcome to OGGO. The floor is yours for 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I see that today we actually have some gentlemen at the committee that I'd like to ask some questions about CARM. I see Mr. Leahy there and Mr. Martel, the Director of Procurement. The challenge that I have with CARM is the complete lack of inconsistent statements on when this project began and how much it will cost. To quote Macbeth, it seems like there's something rotten in Denmark. Mr. Gallivan testified at the Trade Committee. This was started in 2010, and it was a $370 million project. In the Gazette Part 2 that just came out on March 13th, 2024, this government states that in 2014, CBSA began the design and implementation of the CARM project, and the CARM project is a $526 million contract.
Mr. Seaback, I'll stop the clock. Mr. Point of order.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Sorry, I think
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And again, I don't mean to interrupt my honourable colleague's train of thought, but I just wanted to know the relevance here. This is the ArriveCAN study, and we are looking into ArriveCAN and not CARM. And so I just kindly would ask my colleague to establish the relevance to the study on ArriveCAN. Thank you.
I actually see the relevance, so I'll allow to continue. I think we heard from witnesses that Deloitte, which is running CARM, was messing up CARM and therefore was in the penalty box, which led to us getting GC strategies. So I do appreciate your point, but I do see the link. Go ahead. You've got 4 minutes and 4 seconds.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. That just I do apologize, but that is such a tenuous thread, if I could even call it that. And again, we're here on a constituency week. May I remind the chair to study ArriveCAN, and I'd prefer us to focus on ArriveCAN. And again, what is the link to CARM? I don't see it, Mr. Chair. I don't see it.
Well, the link is the contracting irregularities that took place in CARM, and therefore Deloitte was allegedly put in the penalty box, which is how we end up with GC strategies. So the link is pretty direct, and exploring how we got to GC strategies through the problems with CARM might illuminate the committee with respect to this study.
I'm fine with that. Go ahead, Mr. Seaback. You have 4 minutes and 4 seconds.
Thanks very much. So was this actually a project that started in 2010, as Mr. Gallivan stated, or in 2014, which you published in the Gazette a mere 2 weeks ago?
So maybe if I can just deal with the penalty box. So I'm not aware of anyone saying that Deloitte were in the penalty box. And it is worth, identifying that Deloitte worked on us for a number of other things as well. So myself in the Finance and Corporate Management branch,
we'll be happy to provide that from the ATIPs to the committee, and we'll bring you back to talk about it. But if you could answer my question, which is this a project that started in 2010 or 2014? Because your government is saying two absolutely contradictory things.
I'll ask Mr. Leahy to answer this.
Yeah, so the March 2010 is the first phase of CARM, so that is in the critical path material that was provided at in our trade committee. You'll see that
is that ARL?
That is ARL, yes.
Wait, so that's the subsequent program to CARM?
It is the precursor to, like a revenue ledger is extended into CARM, but the language in the submission you'll see is both CARM, ARL, it's interchangeable.
Okay, so what I can't understand is the cost. So what we heard from Mr. Gallivan is $370 million. But what we've also heard at committee was that you've spent $438 million. These two things are very inconsistent. But what actually concerns me the most is this. In a transition document prepared for the VP of CBSA on July 31st, 2021, it says the costs are $371.5 million. But interestingly enough, that nothing in the estimates or anything else adds up to that at that time point. And in fact, you sign a contract on October 6, 2021 for $322,125,778. Now, is this contract a result of verbal approvals that were given to Deloitte to do work, and you had to then prepare a new contract with Deloitte?
So maybe I can ask Mr. Lay to respond to the detail, but I think what I will say at the start is the CALM project has been a long-running project. The first two elements of CALM have been delivered. So the agency revenue ledger has been put online.
I know, but that's not answering my question. My question was the cost identified in the transition document to the VP, July 31st, 2021 is $371 million. Nothing in the estimates or supplemental interest adds up to that, but there is a contract on August 6, 2021 for $322,125,778. It appears to me that this is creating a contract to deal with the overruns, because there was a contract for Deloitte in 2018 for $32 million, which now appears to be turned into a $322 million contract a mere 3 years later. Is this the result of verbal authorizations that had to be covered with a new contract?
So again, I'll say we did not come prepared to this committee to answer questions on CALM. We're very happy to bring back the detailed information, unless Mr. Leahy can answer now.
I can say definitively it wasn't based on a verbal contract, if that was the question. So
verbal approvals for work that lead to the necessity of a new contract.
That is not the case. So I think the evidence that we're bringing forward from our trade committee will demonstrate the history and bring clarity, hopefully, to the question you raised about the lineage of this of the contract. So that material is coming forward to committee.
Thank you, Mr. Lay. Thank you, Mr. Seaback. Mr. Sousa, please, for 5 minutes.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Mr. Seaback, when was, just following up very quickly on CARM, when was it first developed?
I think this meant for you, Mr. Lay.
For me? Yes. So the initial funding allocations came in March 2010.
And when was Deloitte awarded the first contract for the project?
There were two small contracts around that activity, and then the major contract was in February 2018. But the initial two contracts to begin work on CARM ARL, I don't have the precise dates in front of me, but they were awarded around the March 2010 timeline.
So was the majority of the project funding allocated before October 2015?
There were two allocations of funding. So there was an initial allocation, as I mentioned, around that timeline, and then there was a contract award in February of 2018.
Out of curiosity, how much expected loss of revenue would exist as a result of CARM's delay? Like I know you have an estimate why CARM exists, and they're expected to capture some funding. Any idea?
A rough estimate would be about $3 million a month.
Okay. Mr. Moore, post-pandemic now, new normal, changes are being made. Do you still see poor record keeping happening on any other projects at this point? Recognizing some of the issues that have arisen from both the Ombudsman and the Auditor General?
So I think knowledge management and record keeping is always going to be an issue. I think it's an issue around the world in terms of how you ensure that you have the right records, especially post-COVID, which I think impacted as particularly. So we are definitely putting in place ways in which we can improve our record keeping, and I think the good example of that is the Procurement Review Committee is going to be completely minuted, and all the records will be kept centrally by the governance unit.
A lot of suggestions about interrelationships between prospective contract bidders and relationships with employees. Do you think CABSA has done enough to ensure that appropriate oversight is being taken in this respect?
Important to say that if a contractor has worked on developing an RFP, then they are precluded from bidding for that RFP. That is part of our rules and our regulations. So if we find that the investigation says that there's evidence behind that, then action will be taken on that. That is not acceptable. The only time you can use a contractor to help you develop an RFP is if it's a technical requirement, and then the individual who helped you or the company who helped you have to preclude them from bidding on that contract.
Have you been approached by RCMP?
I have not been approached by the RCMP.
You're aware of the reviews, obviously, being done internally in respect to these issues?
I'm aware of the reviews being done internally, and the Security and Professional Standards Directorate do report to the CFO. However, for reviews of executives, all of the reporting is done directly to the Deputy Minister, the President, and I am not being party to any information on those investigations.
Have you ever feel pressured by elected officials in respect to these files?
No, I have not experienced any pressure from elected officials, and actually, as the CBSA, our minister is the Minister of Public Safety, and I very rarely see the minister unless it is about supplementary estimates or main estimates.
And the code of conduct amongst you and your team is very, very clear?
So the CBSA has a very clear code of conduct, which is always kept under review and will be updated. But also we have the overarching public safety ethics responsibilities as well.
How many contracts a year does the CBSA undertake?
So maybe I can ask Alex Martel to answer this.
About 1,500. About 1,500 a year. Yeah.
A year. And in respect to this, the issue around the ArriveCAN component, there is some discrepancy still about the costs. And you mentioned two different costs, one in regards to the immigration component of it, one in regards to the support for the pandemic. Can you elaborate a bit further on this?
So there are two elements to ArriveCAN. So if you look at, well, certainly on my mobile phone, I still have the ArriveCAN app. I've used it a couple of weeks ago to return to Canada. One of the things the Auditor General did point out was the benefits that ArriveCAN is now ongoing. It's still ongoing. The work we have developed during the public health testing stage is now available for us to use for the advanced declaration.
Thank you,
So
Mr.
the discrepancy
Sousa.
in the cost?
Yeah, I'm sorry, that's our time. Unless you have a very quick question that you can respond in writing to, Mr. Sousa.
No, it's okay. Thank you,
Okay.
Mr. Chair.
Thanks. Mrs. Vignola, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Chair. Mr. Moore, the measures, those three measures that you put in place, are they being applied for existing current contracts? For example, the management of resources for the CBSA.
They are being applied to all contracts. The only exception is CALM, which is being managed by the Executive Committee directly. There's a subcommittee for CALM.
Donc, GCRA.
So CARM is not being, all right, managed.
But by a separate committee.
Faire connaître l'application, ajouter.
Add other important characteristics for the app, make people aware of the app. That's what Madame La Douceur said with respect to a question put to her by a journalist, rather. So you have to better understand the app to be able to better use it. So it's about 300,000 people monthly who use it, but that's 13% of the totality of travelers, which is quite a lot between you and me. So how are you going to get it better known? What will it cost? And what other characteristics? How much money is going to be put annually into doing that, and for how long?
So the maintenance of the existing app is costing just under $3 million. That is for cloud hosting and for technical support. The actual advertising is largely being done by third parties. So while I was on the plane coming back, it was Air Canada who was saying, use ArriveCAN, it will speed up your border process. And we're seeing at the airports also extensive advertising of the benefits of ArriveCAN.
Merci.
Thank you. Why isn't applied for the land borders? Why is it only used for airports?
Is to roll out ArriveCAN at the land borders. That's part of our traveller modernisation project, which is ongoing at the moment. Clearly, it was during COVID as part of the public health measures, but the e-declaration will be rolled out at the land borders shortly.
Merci.
Thank you.
Before we go to Mr. Bachrach, would you be able to clarify? You mentioned 3 million. Is that 3 million a year?
It's $3 million a year because we have to
Oh yeah,
cloud
I'm not
hosting,
questioning
all
why.
these
I'm
other
just I couldn't
costs.
understand if it was 3 million a year. Thanks very much, Mr. Bachrach, please, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Moore, going back to my original questions around invoicing, would it be fraudulent for a contractor to submit an invoice to CBSA indicating that a certain resource had been used to complete the work when that resource wasn't, in fact, used to complete the work? Would that be fraudulent?
It would be if it was a staff augmentation contract. So, for example, if we had asked for a level 3 technical architect and we were delivered a level 2 technical architect, that would be fraudulent. But in this case, in the Bottler case, we were asking for an outcome, for an output, and so therefore we were judging the quality of the output on the quality of the work done, not on who did it.
So can I take it from your comments that there was no process to confirm which resources were used in getting to that outcome? What CBSA was concerned with was the quality of the outcome, not the resources that were used to get there?
And especially in this case, because this was a subcontractor to the vendor who we contracted with.
Now, that subcontractor didn't have a contract, just to be clear, but I guess what I'm trying to get at is this idea that different resources in these task authorizations, different resources are valued at different amounts. And we've heard at this committee about the bait and switch approach that some unscrupulous companies use, where they suggest that certain resources are going to be used in order to get the work. And then when the work is actually done, they use different resources that cost them less. Here we have a case where a contractor is indicating that a certain resource was involved in the work when in fact they weren't. And you're saying that that isn't a problem?
The contract, if Bottler's contract would be with Dalian Coradix, it's not with us. We were contracting with Dalian Coradix, and we were asking them to produce 6 documents. And, you know, it was not relevant to us who was producing those documents. What was relevant to us was the quality of the documents in line with the statement of works.
Is it required that the resources used be cited on the invoice? I'm looking at the invoice right here. It includes the task number and the specific resources that were utilized in completing the work. Is that a requirement of the invoicing process?
Not in this case, because we were asking for a task. We weren't asking for individuals. That is a requirement if it's a staff augmentation contract, because then we won't need to check that we have the right skills and experience to do the work.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Duncan, welcome to OGGO. Please go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Auditor General said in her report that the documentation provided by the CBSA, the financial records and controls were so poor that they were unable to determine the precise cost, and they pegged it at $60 million. That report's been out now for 50 days. Mr. Moore, can you tell us if you've provided any follow-up documentation since this report to the Auditor's Office to further clarify what exactly the cost of ArriveCAN was?
Work with the Auditor General on identifying the costs which we had assigned to public health.
I'm going to ask you, sorry, since the report was tabled, have you provided any further clarification from her report about the exact cost of ArriveCAN after the report was tabled?
No, we have not provided any further information, but the information we've agreed to provide to this committee, we're very happy to share with the Auditor General.
So it's been 50 days, and your work was frankly shredded by the Auditor General and said the number has not been clarified, can't even get an exact number, and you've not provided anything in 50 days to clear up any of the misperception or actually get a firm number.
Well, as I've said before, I don't think it's possible to get a completely firm number because in the first year we did not have a separate accounting code. What we did was we used our experts to make their best estimate of how much it had cost. Our best estimate remains $55 million.
Well, let me ask you this, because we're now aware that 76% of contractors who did actually no work on this, that billed the CBSA. We know there's record of shredded documents that is well known and been shared with Canadians. And again, the Auditor General said there were weak financial controls and record keeping when it came to your work. So as a CFO, do you think that a third-party forensic audit of ArriveCan is necessary based on what you now know and the points I just raised?
So I think you've raised a number of different points in there. So the procurement ombudsman referred to the 76%. That was actually the question which was previously about sort of who does the work. When you're using staff augmentation, we were checking the individuals had the sufficient qualifications.
But I'm going to ask this at a high level. Of all the facts that I raised and the circumstances and what you know now as the CFO, do you believe that an independent third-party forensic audit is necessary with ArriveCan? We have shredded documents. The Auditor General said there was weak financial records and controls, and the procurement ombudsman report, yes or no? Do you believe that a third-party forensic audit is required here in this circumstance?
I don't think it would add any additional, because we've already had a third-party audit in terms of the Auditor General, but also OPPO. What we're acknowledging here is we did not have a cost accounting code in year one. And so it is a judgment how much was being spent on ArriveCan versus other operational activities.
So I think there's many Canadians would disagree and say a forensic audit in this case by a third party is necessary for each of these, because the more we learn, the more vague and the more evasive, frankly, many of the witnesses will be on this. But Mr. Moore, I want to ask you about performance bonusing. The executives at CBSA that have been responsible for what happened here with ArriveCan, can you confirm whether they have received bonuses this year or not?
I can't confirm whether they've received bonuses this year, as the year is not actually at an end. But I can confirm that during the period under review, I did receive performance payments, but we've already agreed to come back with information of that to the committee.
Going forward then in that case, knowing now with the Auditor General's report now tabled, do you believe executives at CBSA responsible for ArriveCan should get performance bonuses in the future?
Well, I can't comment on that because lots of people are involved in lots of different things.
So you wouldn't rule out, based on what you know and the findings here in the Auditor General's report, the Procurement Ombudsman report, and all the facts that you know, based on how atrocious the financial record keeping was at CBSA, you can't rule out and say now that executives at CBSA that were responsible for this mess should not get a performance bonus going forward, now that you know what's in the Auditor General's report? So
I know what's in the Auditor General, and I'm disappointed. So I come back to my previous comment. When we do our financial assurance, we're on average, it's around about 8 or 9% errors. Most of those are not compliance errors, they're administrative errors. In the Auditor General's case, she identified 18%. That is very disappointing, and I recognize that. However, a lot of that is to do with the fact we did not have a cost accounting code at that time.
Well, there's a $60 million error with ArriveCan that Canadians are frustrated with, and again, you're disappointed. I'm going to ask you again, so being by disappointed in the contents of the report and how damning it was about the financial practices and record keeping, you're not going to rule out that executives at CBSA this year are going to get performance bonuses based on what we now know with ArriveCan?
Well, I don't think that's a question I can answer because I do not set performance bonuses. But what I can say is that we are taking action to address all the recommendations in the Auditor General's report. But I do not agree that it's we don't have the information. There are areas in the information which we are uncertain about, and we had to make estimates.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Ms. Atwood, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Mr. Moore, and your colleagues for being with us today. And forgive me, I'm kind of joining halfway through here, so I'm going to hopefully not be repeating myself or what my colleagues have already asked. So I see from your submitted, your introductory notes here, you've got that the Public Health Agency of Canada asked the CBSA to assist them by developing a digital form, and the first version of ArriveCan was then released 6 weeks later. Can you walk us through what those first 6 weeks looked like?
Those first 6 weeks were very, very difficult for the agency. The pandemic had been announced, and we were very much at the front line. We had individuals in the Border Services officers who were dealing with people who could have been infected by COVID-19. There were a number of repatriation flights. And the best we could do at that stage was to have a manual paper-based form. This was an issue for a lot of our officers because at the same time we were being told you could catch COVID from touching paper. So it was an urgent matter to get this form digitized. And, you know, when you look at sort of value for money, the paper-based system was around about $3 per unit, whereas the ArriveCan system is about $1 per unit, so $1 per traveller. So that was more efficient than the paper-based system. It was actually also much more effective than the paper-based system because the paper-based system had to be sent off. It had to be coded into the records, and it then had to be provided to FAC, who then provided it to municipalities to actually follow up on the quarantine. The Auditor General, in her own report, identifies that it was more effective to use ArriveCan because they could get that information before the end of a 14-day period, where on the paper-based system, it was taking up to 3 or 4 weeks to get that information. So I think it is worth bearing in mind the sort of the effectiveness and the efficiency, but it was a very difficult time for all of us. Also, very quickly, a large majority of our employees were sent home to work from home, which was a new thing for lots of us. So yes, I would say at the start of the pandemic, it was a crisis situation. We were working incredibly long hours, and during that time, I'm sure we made mistakes and we should learn from those mistakes, but it was a very stressful and difficult situation.
Thank you very much. I certainly remember that time. You know, we were told to even wash our groceries, for example, or wear gloves to pump gas. So it was certainly a time of uncertainty. So in the next piece here, it mentions, so following the 2.5 years after the fact, CBSA responded to the challenging health requirements as they were coming at you again, kind of drinking from a fire hose. And through over 80 orders in council, there was released 177 different versions of the app. Can you just kind of, I mean, each one I wouldn't ask you to explain, but what predominantly were some of those changes with each one of those iterations of the app?
So when we set up our governance structure in the pandemic, we set up two separate task authorization areas. So I was responsible for the internal task force, and one of my colleagues was responsible for the border task force. All the ArriveCan was done through the border task force. This is mentioned in the Auditor General's report in 2021. It was then a partnership at that stage between FAC, ourselves, and a number of other government departments. So those decisions were being made at minute by minute. I was not part of those decisions. I was running the internal task force, which was more focused on the activities of the organisation and the health and safety of our officers. But it was a very dynamic environment, and my understanding is things were changing very much at the last minute, and then that had to be coded to allow us to update ArriveCan at the time. It was very complex, it was very difficult, and hours were being worked, very long hours were being worked.
Thank you. And are you aware of any traveler information and customs applications like ArriveCan developed or procured by other governments?
So there were a number around the world. All of them were slightly different. Certainly the UK's one, which I was aware of, was different. I know the European one also. But basically they were doing the same function. They were trying to record information on people travelling into the country so that they could trace those contacts. And that was particularly important when you were seeing new variants coming in, and allow the public health agencies around the world to be able to track where those individuals had been and how the spread of the new variants was operating. Also, as the ArriveCan app progressed, we had the proof of vaccine credential, which was also a very complicated, difficult system for us to be able to identify the vaccines and go right back into the provincial health data and systems to check that they were valid.
And were there any conversations happening? Oh, sorry.
Sorry, if you have a quick question, Ms. Atwin, go ahead.
Sure. I'm just wondering were there discussions or dialogue happening as far as shared practices or best practices within those kind of government entities that were facing the same thing, or kind of flying on our own on this one?
And a quick answer, Mr. Moore.
So we did have many conversations with our colleagues around the world, but I think we were slightly flying by the ear because every requirement was different.
Thank you very much. Mr. Brock, please.
As he then was at the CBSA, who did Min Doan directly report to?
He reported to the President, John Osowski, which is the same for me.
Okay. I'm sure you're familiar with the allegations of Mindone's deleted tens of thousands of emails over 4 years.
I'm aware.
You're aware of that? When did you first become aware of that, sir?
When it was raised in committee, I was not aware before then.
I'm sorry?
When it was raised here in committee, or I wasn't aware before.
Okay. Would you agree with me, sir, that potentially deleting, not by corrupted means, but deliberately deleting 4 years' worth of relevant emails during the ArriveCAN development and outlay would constitute not only a highly suspicious action on behalf of Mindone, but also potentially illegal under the criminal code, thinking to mind obstruction of justice? Do you believe that that's worthy of an internal investigation?
So the CBSA does take allegations of wrongdoing very, very seriously, and my understanding that is being looked at.
Is the CBSA investigating that internally, yes or no?
I do not know if they're investigating that specifically, but
will you look into that, and will you provide us with a response?
I would be happy for the agency to provide a response.
Thank you. Are you aware whether or not that allegation of deleting tens of thousands of emails over 4 years has been reported to the RCMP?
I'm not aware whether it's been reported to the RCMP.
Okay. Now, I want to circle back to Government of Canada strategies. There's a couple of issues that raised in the Auditor General's report. Firstly, you, CBSA, I shouldn't say, not you, CBSA informed the Auditor General during the report stage that GC Strategies was awarded their initial contract on the basis of a proposal that is submitted. CBSA indicated that it had discussions at the time with 3 potential contractors about submitting a proposal to develop the ArriveCAN app. Yet, through investigation, the Auditor General found that only 1 proposal was received by the CBSA and not for Government of Canada strategies. Why would the agency deliberately mislead the Auditor General?
So my understanding is at the start of the pandemic, and again, I was not directly involved in these discussions, that they mocked up what the ArriveCAN first version would look like, and they asked 3 organizations, Deloitte, Apple, and GC Strategies.
I'm aware of that. Why would the CBSA deliberately mislead the Auditor General in saying that you received a proposal from Government of Canada strategies when in fact you did not? Why would they deliberately mislead?
Yep. So I'm not aware of that, and I'm sure.
You read the Auditor General report?
Well, I've read the Auditor General's report, but
did you not read that section?
Well, the section there is around GC Strategies was providing people.
No, sir. You, the CBSA, said that GC Strategies provided a proposal. The Auditor General confirmed it did not. So the question is very simple. Why is the CBSA actively misleading the Auditor General in the performance of her role? It really begs to mind the cozy relationship that Government of Canada Strategies has with the CBSA. Second case in point, there was a reference to a $25 million sole source contract going to GC Strategies, and the CBSA invited Government of Canada Strategies to write their own contract. If that's not showing favoritism to GC Strategies, I don't know what is. So what is going on at the CBSA to allow these highly irregular and suspicious contracting practices with Christian Firth and Darren Anthony of Government of Canada Strategies?
So as I've said before, that is not permitted under the rules and regulations. And
but it happened.
It happened, and so...
So who was responsible for that?
That's what the investigation is considering.
Surely, sir, you must have some suspicion. Were you personally involved in allowing GC to do that?
I was not involved in GC Strategies at all.
Are you prepared to name names, sir? Are you preparing to speak truth to power? Are you protecting your president?
I'm not protecting anybody. My understanding is that's all being looked at as part of the investigation.
Who's looking into it?
The investigation and also the RCMP. And
you're talking about Mr. Lafleur? The so-called independent investigator that reports to Ms. O'Gorman?
He is the internal investigator.
Right.
Just like
he's not independent.
And the RCMP are independent, and they're also looking at
the RCMP is independent.
I am not aware of how the status of that. What I am aware of is, it has been longer than our normal standard operating procedures. So Our service standards are 120 working days to complete an investigation. It has been longer than that.
I can tell you, Canadian taxpayers are very disappointed in the operations of the CBSA, sir.
That is our time, gentlemen. Mr. Baines, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And my question to Mr. Moore is, I was asking you about, I believe we ran out of time. I wanted to ask you about Mr. Doan, about the decision to pick GC Strategies. His initial response was a team of 1,400 people made this decision, and then when asked, he narrowed it down to 6 director generals. So my question to you is, did this decision come down to these director generals? Were they giving instruction or advice? I'll let you answer that first.
I think Mr. Dwan was referring to the fact there are 1,400 people in the information science and technology branch. Those were people who were directly reporting to him as the vice president. I think it's also clear that the technical authorities for all these contracts was the Board of Technologies and Innovation Directorate. And as I've said before, the executive director of that was Mr. Otano, and the DG of that was Mr. MacDonald. I cannot sort of comment on what Mr. Dwan actually said back at the evidence. I have looked at the evidence, but I can't comment on the detail.
I'm asking about the 6 director generals. Mr. Dwan, when asked, was asked to submit those names. I'm not sure if those were ever submitted. So I'm asking the roles of those people and if you could name them.
So I think we can go back and check to see whether the names were, but he was referring to the director generals who report to him. I think in this case it would be unlikely that all of those director generals would be involved in a decision like this. It would have been the responsibility of the DG of the area of his organisation who was doing this contracting.
Would you be able to submit those names of those 6 director generals?
We'd be very happy to submit the names of those if they have not been already submitted.
Okay. When examining options for suppliers, what evidence was CBSA relying on that indicated GC Strategies could provide the federal government value for money?
So again, in the evidence given last week by Public Safety, the PSPC, they were on a TBIPS, so they were already a qualified vendor, and that was confirmed by PSPC. In terms of value for money, in terms of contract, that's part of the contract authority's responsibilities. The technical authority is responsible for the statement of work and the technical ability of the contractors to do that work. So I would refer back to PSPC for any questions around the value for money from the contract authority.
On the issues identified by the Auditor General, Procurement Ombudsman, the report's the result of shortcomings in the directive on the management of procurement, or rather the guidance to managers about that directive. What's your view on that?
This is one of the reasons why we have asked all of our delegated managers to do the 4 training courses in order to remind them of what their responsibilities are under the Procurement Directorate. It's also around our other procurement improvement plan activities. For example, the Executive Procurement Review Committee will also be checking that we are complying with all of those rules and regulations. Alex's team has already updated our standard operating procedures with checklists to ensure that we are complying, and we're also putting in place this assurance review process, which will allow us to go into the individual files and ensure they have been complying across all of the files we look at.
Has this been shared with the entire department? Are people being trained upon this? What's the latest?
So everyone has been trained in terms of the first line of defence. We're now training within Alex's directorate the individuals who will be doing the assurance reviews, and also we will be training the Executive Procurement Review Committee in order to ensure that they have all of the knowledge available to them to be able to exercise their judgment correctly.
And how is the new guidance? Like, what will you be providing a report back on the compliance in some capacity?
Yes. So reviews will be summarised on a quarterly basis, and they will be reported back to the Executive Committee. the first, we've already piloted the reviews, but our first quarterly report will be in July.
Thank you.
How much time do I have, Mr. Chair?
Time for one very, very brief question.
I'll cede my time. That's okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Baines. Mrs. Vignola, please.
Thank you very much. Earlier, Mr. Moore, you said that you weren't aware that members of your team had received an award for the LCAGM. How can that be? Because it seems to me that as an employee, they'd like to be given a pat on the back by their boss.
I'll ask Alex to give you a detailed answer, but I am disappointed because in my branch we do like to celebrate success, and I thought it would have been notified to me.
So en contexte, Monsieur le Président.
For context, Chair, I report to the controller, and the controller reports to another level. Oh, yes. Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't know who would be involved, but Mr. Leahy, earlier we talked about GCRA, that is to say CARM, and there were some elements that were somewhat like Arrive Can. A lot of goodwill. You wanted to accelerate things. Yeah, it seemed to be like a nerve center for trade. So, how many pages were in the submission from Deloitte? That is to say, what they submitted in terms of specifications. How detailed was it for CARM?
Sur le contrat?
Are you talking about the contract? No, the book of technical specifications. Were there any comments made? And if so, how many? Well, hundreds of pages, and there were a variety of documents, but some 600 plus pages, and there were comments where people from the CBSA had to comment. Were there only comments from the IT people, but from the CBSA as well? From both. It's supposed to start operating May 14? No, it's May 13. May 13. Well, for one, let's not quibble over one day. So are we going to be faced with software that won't be tested enough? CARM has been tested for 2 years. 6 separate activities have been tested. 80 million to date? The budget, the development budget?
Perhaps
It's
you
my
can
time.
get back
I'll
to
just
us in
answer that.
writing, unless you've got the information there.
It's the development to date is the development budget is 438 and 182 million paid to Deloitte. That's what came up at the last committee. The question was, how much did you pay Deloitte, and how much have you spent on development of this? So 438 on development and 182 to Deloitte for development.
Thanks very much. Mr. Bachrach, please, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Moore, to a previous question, you indicated that no one raised red flags about GC strategies until this committee's investigation began. Do you stand by that statement?
I do, and I find that disappointing. And I think one of the things we have learnt from here is we do need greater oversight of procurement and task authorizations in the organisation, which is why we have developed up the procurement improvement plan. I think, going back to 2020, the procurement team was relatively small. We have now enhanced the procurement team to act as an assurance provider as well as a contract authority for the contracts we do.
To be clear, though, Mr. Moore, didn't Bottler raise serious concerns and allegations regarding the relationship between GC Strategies and CBSA in 2021?
So my understanding is that Bottler at the time raised concerns with sorry, I'm losing. So with ISTB around the payments they were making a complaint that they had not been paid by Dalian and Coradix. It wasn't until I think November 2022 that they raised allegations, which went straight to the president, and the president passed those to the Internal Affairs, who then subsequently passed them to the RCMP.
So then, but this committee's investigation didn't start until after that. So CBSA had received the concerns from Bottler prior to this committee beginning its work on ArriveCan, correct?
I can't precisely remember the dates, but I was made aware of the allegations from the president when she received them in, I think, November 2022, and then they were passed to Internal Affairs.
Yeah, I guess the surprising part of your statement that no one had raised red flags about GC strategies is the fact that if you read the Bottler investigation report that they provided to CBSA, it's alarming. What's the communications and the relationships that are documented in that report point to, and admittedly, not all of these have been proven out, but they point to major misconduct at CBSA. And yet it's taken this committee's work to get to this point where the RCMP is now looking into it, and there are something like 12 different investigations into how CBSA conducts procurement. So I'm just wondering why CBSA didn't take Bottler's red flags more seriously back when they raised them.
So I have not seen...
Sorry, Mr. Moore. I'm sorry, we're quite a bit past our time. Perhaps you can provide that in writing.
Well,
perhaps,
thanks, Mr. Chair.
If I could say, Chair, I've not seen the Bottler report. It's not been provided to me.
Okay, thanks very much. Mr. Berthold?
Merci. Thank you. Thank you very much, Chair. Mr. Moore, I want to come back to the letter. This, I feel, is an important part of this whole ArriveCan issue. The letter that you sent to Madame Reza with respect to the exception that should be made for national security. There's no date. When was it written?
It was written, my understanding, on the 1st of June, so I'm sorry that we don't seem to have the date on the letter.
1st June of?
1st of June of 2022. 2020, pardon.
Okay, le 1er juin.
June 1, 2020. You seem to... you were ready to answer questions earlier. I have a question. You wanted that the supplier was XR when we were looking for it earlier? Yes, I had a meeting with Mr. Utano's team, and they intended to deal with XR, which is a company that had worked for Transport Canada. Who organized the meeting? Mr. Utano's team. Do you know if they had any links with GC strategy? The two companies, it's marked there, the two companies are together. On the agenda, they were noted agenda together. So you found a supplier for modern tools, XR, but it was XR GC strategy. Can you explain to me exactly what it meant? What exactly? Earlier, you talked to me about GC strategy. Why? The two, when I look at the invitation that I received in April, the two companies were named on the agenda, XR/GC Strategies. The two names were together. So it was in this letter then that you signed, Mr. Moore, and it was the first time that you saw GC Strategies without naming them. The supplier that you were recommending, that you were quoting in the letter to the minister for PSPC, was in actual fact made up of GC Strategies and the aforementioned one.
Aware of that. The letter was provided to me by the by the individuals who were responsible for preparing it, and as you said, it did not refer to the actual name. That's why I asked Mr. Leahy to answer, because he was aware of the names.
Donc, c'est comme ça.
So that's how then the GC strategy got into the file of ArriveCan.
I would say that for my comment, that reference was not to an individual company which I was aware of, and also it was a reference to a company which was doing commercial goods rather than doing traveller goods, which ArriveCan.
Mais pour... Là, je sais qu'il y a une question.
Well, I know it's a matter of interpretation, English and French here, but you are hesitating. You avoided citing the names of these two companies earlier, but now we know that it was an actual joint company and not necessarily bound by shareholders or contracts that was making that presentation. So that was the first time in that letter where you speak of an exemption to be made rather than going through the normal process of procurement. That would be the first time that GC strategy got into this file, was part of it.
Je pense, Monsieur le Président, il y a eu...
I think, Chair, there were contracts with GC Strategies that had been let before June the 1st. So I think you have to distinguish between justification for sole source, which is often a case for contracts, and the exception for national security, where a given contract would involve agreements, international agreements. So these contracts that were signed for ArriveCan were signed after this exception. No, there were contracts that were let before that, but after the letter. I'm talking about after the letter. Yes, there were contracts that were let after the letter. What proportion of contracts, Mr. Martel? Can you answer that? Well, I can commit to giving you the answer.
It's in writing.
Absolutely.
Mr. Baines, I understand you're up, sir.
I believe that's me, actually, Mr. Chair. Is that correct?
I had Mr. Baines, but go ahead, Mr. Kuzmierczuk, if you wish.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. I'm going to ask you, Mr. Moore, just to comment on the following. Since the information about the ArriveCan has come to light, we've had the RCMP is looking at ArriveCan. We have the Ombudsman Procurement Office that has provided a report on the management gaps around ArriveCan. We've had the Auditor General provide a report around the management gaps, financial gaps, documentation gaps around the ArriveCan. We will be hearing from the Competition Bureau of Canada, as I understand, will be coming here as a witness. We've also asked the Public Sector Integrity Commissioner, as I understand it as well too, to possibly appear and provide testimony or look into this issue. At the same time, there is a CBSA investigation that is ongoing, as we have heard, an internal investigation. At the same time, PSPC already has suspended GC strategies back in November of 2023. I believe CBSA has followed suit as well, suspending, contracts with GC strategies. In March 6th of this year, we understand that PSPC has suspended security status for GC strategies as well too. Can you comment on sort of the what's taking place right now in terms of the investigations and studies that are taking place into ArriveCan? Can you just comment on it? And are we missing something? Is there anything else that we need to be other agencies or bodies that we could bring to bear on this issue?
So I don't feel that we're missing anything. There have been an awful lot of studies. I would put them into two categories. I think, we know that issues arose during the pandemic, and we are grateful for the lessons learned. I think the lessons learned are fairly similar across most of the studies. And as I've said before, we're putting in place a very detailed procurement improvement plan, but also a wider management improvement plan, which includes financial management. I think the second category is wrongdoing. And we are committed. We take allegations of wrongdoing very seriously. We are committed to acting on any founded wrongdoing. It's probably worth just sort of thinking about sort of our wider investigations. So in 2022, we had 212 founded allegations, and we took disciplinary action on 144 of those founded allegations. So we do see, sadly, investigations and allegations which are being made, and we have a very professional team who complete that work. Clearly, there's also an investigation going on for the RCMP. So I can't talk about the wrongdoing, and I would leave that up to the experts. But what I can say is we've already put in place very clear improvement plans around the lessons to be learned. I don't think necessarily there's anything being missed in the lessons learned. And as the Controller General said a few meetings ago, perhaps this is now the time to allow CBSA to get on and deliver those improvements, because really we have a lot to do. And I think we recognise the problems. We are disappointed in a lot of those problems, and now we are working to address them.
It's been asserted that the $50+ million of the ArriveCan, that the costs have ballooned out of control. But we heard today from your testimony that, in fact, in the first year, $5 million was approved for the ArriveCan system, not just the app, but the system. And then in year 2, additional funding allocations were made of about $25 million. And then in year 3, an additional $25 million were provided to run the ArriveCan system. Can you speak to that and speak to the assertion that CBSA was not aware of the costs?
So thank you very much. So, lots of talked about value for money, and actually I spent the first 10 years of my career being an external auditor, and I'm very aware of the value for money studies. Value for money is made up of 3 core functions: economy, efficiency, and effectiveness. And I do believe ArriveCan provided value for money. I don't believe it provided best value for the taxpayer. And the examples I'll use on that one, it was very clear to us that in terms of effectiveness, it was providing information to the Public Health Agency so they could enforce quarantine on a timely basis. That was not being provided by the paper-based system, and the Auditor General recognises that in her report. In terms of efficiency, it's also clear that the ArriveCan app was costing around about $1 per person. We had 60 million travellers processed, and it was around about $60 million in terms of the cost. That compares to the $3 per person, which is a paper-based system. Economy is a much more difficult thing to prove, and it also requires judgment and hindsight to look at economy. So I do not believe that we necessarily had best value for the taxpayer, and we learnt a lot of lessons there, but we were in an emergency crisis situation. We overused contractors, which I think elsewhere we would take more time, we would do less of that. If it wasn't in a crisis, we would have had a project plan. We would have actually treated this as a project, and we would have had a plan and we would have implemented it. So yes, I think it has provided value for money, not necessarily best value for the taxpayer.
Thank you, Mr. Kuzmirchuk.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Colleagues, before we adjourn, I need to approve a couple quick budgets, please. One is on the sub-Cs, and the others are for the main estimates. Each one is, one's 500, one is, I think, 1,000. It's just for headsets and meals. We probably won't use the headset money, and we won't use all the meals, but they're both 1,000, so. And as usual, it's for contingency in case we need to send out headsets, which I don't think we will. So I see thumbs up and general agreement for the sub-Cs for 1,000, and then the same for the mains for 1,000 as well. I see thumbs ups all around. Thank you very much. Mr. Brock, sir?
Yes.
Before we adjourn?
Before we adjourn, colleagues, as a committee, we've been dancing around several issues of disclosure with various witnesses in terms of bottler communications with CBSA, the misconduct report that started the internal investigation, and the referral to the RCMP, and lastly, the whole issue regarding the deleted emails in the report generated by CBSA. So, Mr. Chair, I'm prepared to move a motion at this time in both official languages. The clerk has this motion in both languages. If you could distribute it to the committee. The motion reads, and I'm very flexible in terms of the timing here as well, colleagues, that the committee direct the Canada Border Services Agency, CBSA, to present no later than April the 2nd, 2024, A, all bottler AI communication with Aaron O'Gorman and other employees of the CBSA, B, the misconduct report received from bottler AI in the fall of 2022, and C, any and all evidence pertaining to the deleted and or missing CBSA emails attributed to Min Doan. Hoping I can get unanimous consent, Chair.
Starting the speaking list, I saw Mr. Kuzmierczak, then Mr. Souza, and then Mr. Casey. Go ahead, Mr. Kuzmierczak.
Mr. Chair, I just ask for a little bit of time to suspend here, that we suspend so that my colleagues and I have a chance to review this motion and to discuss it, please.
Sure. 5 minutes, Mr. Kuzmierczak.
Perfect. Thank you.
Great. With everyone's permission, we will excuse our witnesses then, if that's okay with everyone. I take that as yes. We'll suspend for 5 minutes, and in the meantime, Mr. Moore, Mr. Leahy, Mr. Martel, and Mr. Alexander, even though you didn't get to join in today, thanks for joining us today, and we are suspended. again. I had the speaking list of Mr. Kusmirchuk, Mr. Sousa, and Mr. Casey, but I just see Mr.